everybody, welcome back to DeHaven Family Farm. Today we're going to do the second video in the goat series about owning a goat. We're going to talk about housing and pasture today. As I said, today's video we're going to talk about goat housing. So our barn and setup is based on around 25 to 30 goats. So if you don't have this many goats, you don't have to worry about having a setup quite this big or elaborate. I just wanted to show you what we do, and you can take those principles basically of what we do and scale them down to size for your operation. Whether you have 2 goats or 5 goats or 10 goats, you can kind of scale things down. The other thing is to note about this barn, our original intent was to do milking and possibly sell the milk. So again, things are a little bit more elaborate here. We're not going to do a full barn tour today because this video is going to get long enough without doing that. But just to note that our original barn plan here and design was based on being approved for raw milk sales. So some of the things that we did here, again, are a little more elaborate, so you don't have to worry about that. But again, the principles will apply. So let's talk about the housing itself. Now, if you have watched our last video, you saw a short clip of the goats sort of running. And what we did was we took them out of this barn. This was one of our pens. We had additional pen here, and we had birthing pens here. So what we're working on, the goats have been moved over to that barn over there because we're going to do some remodeling in here. We're redoing some of the pens. We've had goats for about 6, almost 7 years, and over the course of time we've changed things around a little bit. So just trying different things, see what works, what doesn't work. So we're not going to get into greatly about our birthing pens and the different types of goat pens. I can do a video on that when we're all done with that stuff. Don't mind the mess in here. So this was just our main goat pen here. You can see we designed these little systems here. We had these little doors with the trays that you could open, and there was a hook there, and then the goats stick their head out to eat, and then when they're done eating, we'd close them. And of course their water bucket, same thing, through a little hole. And what this did, it accomplished a couple of things. It kept the water and the feed trays clean, because as you know, most animals just sort of go to the bathroom wherever they happen to be standing. So it allowed us to keep these items clean. Cleanliness is an important aspect of any animal health. So what do you really need to be successful with goats? The first thing you need is just some sort of nice shelter, whether it's like a little Amish shed or a hand-built shed. You want to make sure that they can get out of the elements and that the environment is well ventilated but not drafty. We have windows in those doors that we can open if the door happens to be closed. We have more windows over here and doors, and we also use a small fan that we can use to circulate the air. We have it set so that it pulls the air out at night. See, again, where we're located here, we have predators, coyotes, things like that, so we have to lock our goats in at night to make sure that they're safe. So while they're in, we want to be able to manage the amount of fresh air and things that comes in for them, again, to keep them healthy. So you want to be able to manage the draft. If it's 10 below out and the wind's blowing, you want to be able to close that barn up so that no cold air is getting in. So again, keep that in mind when you design a structure or buy a structure. So another thing to keep in mind is you want to have a separate area for the hay and the feed, and don't let the goats get into it. A lot of people, they put everything in the same little room, and that's fine, but then you have goats jumping on metal garbage cans and things, and it just becomes a messy situation. So in order to have a good experience owning goats, you want to make things as easy and efficient as possible on yourself. So make sure you have a good divider between, if you just have the one room, a good divider between your food storage area and your goat area. We have dwarf goats, so our pens tend to be a little bit lower here. This is 44 inches. If you have full-size goats, you're going to want to go with at least a 4-foot pen. So this is our feed room. It's a little dark in here. We normally have rows of garbage cans and our electrical panels in here, and we have some water comes into the barn here. You do not need a separate feed room, but I do recommend using the metal garbage cans with the lids because rats cannot chew into them and it'll keep the mice out. It just keeps your food safe and clean. So talking about hay racks, we build our own here. You can see that we just use, this is a 2x4 mesh that we use, and we just put the hay in it and they eat out of that. We do not put the hay on the floor just for cleanliness sake. So another aspect to goat housing is the ability for the goats to be able to go in and out and get fresh air when the weather is nice. So you can accomplish this by a couple different ways. We have a big door that we keep open in the summertime, and then in the wintertime when the weather's cold and the wind's blowing, we have a smaller door that we open down here, and you can see the outline of it right there. So it's a door in a door, and that just keeps the barn from getting too drafty during the day when the goats are able to go in and out. And they'll spend a lot of time outside, but if it gets too cold, they like to be able to come back in. So now let's go out and we'll talk about the outside area for the goats by the barn, and we'll talk about pasture. Okay, so behind me you can see our outside area. We have sort of a penned-in area for our goats. That's actually a bunny area over there with the gate open, but so don't mind that area. But everything around here you can see with these rubber mats. This is an area for the goats. We call it like the yard. So you can see all the goat manure that's out here right now. We just moved them over and we haven't cleaned this up yet. But I want you to take note of how much manure is here. This is, I believe they were here for about a week since the last time it was cleaned. So the manure that you see here is about a week's worth. So what this does is it keeps, using this yard, keeps all this manure off the pasture. So in talking about goat health and worms and coccidia issues, which are two of the main issues with goats, I'm going to step under here so there's no snow that gets on the lens here. Keeping the pastures clean and allowing the goats to not graze the grass too low is very important. Pasture rotation is very important with goats. Even if you only have 2 goats in a small area, you want to divide it into 2 or 3 sections so that you can rotate them between section and section. It's super important. So we have this yard area here that we'll have more hay racks in here when they're here, but again, since they're not here. And we use this area quite a bit. So in the springtime when the grass isn't growing yet, we don't let them out there to graze, and we feed them in this yard area. It allows them to go out, but they're not on the pasture trying to eat some kind of grass and nibble things. When it's muddy, they're not out there. And then in the summertime, if we have hot, dry weather, which hasn't happened for years now, but if we have hot, dry weather and the pasture stops growing, we don't want them to eat it down too low. So again, we have this yard here that we can use. So it's important to have an area right outside the barn that you can control where the goats go and what they eat and keep them off the pasture. Now, it doesn't have to be this big if you only have 2 goats, but I still recommend having an area that you can keep clean that the goats can go when they can't be on pasture. We've tried other things here. One thing that we could do would be concrete, but we like the rubber mats. It's nice on the goats' feet. Before, we used to try like mulch out here. We had stone, and those things are very difficult to keep clean, and even the mulch would turn sort of mucky after. So again, in terms of keeping things clean, the mats work great for us. So now let's talk about some pasture. So here on our farm, for our does, which are female goats, that's what this barn is for. We do have a separate area for the bucks. We have 3 large pastures and 1 small pasture. So we are able to rotate the goats around on these pastures. So there's the one I'm standing in here that has some of the rocks and things. Goats like to climb on things, so feel free to add some things in here, build some things. We have an upper pasture there that you can see has pigs in it right now. We have a smaller pasture here, which works great if you have any sick animals, you get any new animals that you're going to introduce in. There's all kind of uses for just a small area. And then we have another large pasture down the bottom. You can see that there's kind of some grass tufts down there that they never finished up before winter came. So we have 3 main pastures that we can rotate them on. So again, if you only have, 2 goats or 5 goats, you may not need to have pastures the size that we have. They're all fenced in, they're all gated, so we're able to rotate them from one to another fairly easily. That's another thing to consider. If you have one big pasture, at least maybe have some permanent fencing around the big pasture, and then you could use some electric fencing or something similar to divide it until you see what works best for you. But I really recommend dividing your pastures so that you can rotate what they eat. So I hope this video has helped you out a little bit about the types of goat housing that you need. Again, you don't need anything too elaborate, but you want to have something that protects the goats from the elements, protects them from any predators, allows them some outside area that is not in the pasture, have some pasture area that you can rotate. So I know there's probably a lot we didn't cover in this video, but I'm trying to keep it somewhat short. So feel free to plop your questions down below. I'll be happy to answer them. The next video in the series is going to talk about goat care. So we'll get into a little bit on feet trimming, vaccines, what to feed them. All those types of things will be discussed in the 3rd video in the series. So I hope this video was helpful to you. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope maybe you learned something. So again, questions, comments down below. Thanks for watching. Don't forget the subscribe button so you don't miss the 3rd video in the series. And I'll catch everybody on the next video. Thanks for watching.